Welcome to Detonation Point. I'm your host, Matt O'Neill. I was with the U.S. Secret Service for 25 years and retired as the Deputy Special Agent in charge of the cyber operations part of the Criminal Investigative Division. In Detonation Point, I'm going inside the fight against cybercrime, hearing directly from defenders in government, infrastructure, and enterprise who are racing to stay ahead, because cybercrime isn't slowing down, and neither can we. Welcome to Detonation Point, presented by Elastio. Thanks again for joining us for Detonation Point presented by Elastio. I'm excited to have our guest this week, Michelle Ball, on. Michelle is one of the few people that I've ever met in federal civilian law enforcement that also has a background in broadcast and journalism. So, Michelle, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, talk a little bit about your background in broadcast journalism. You were a TV reporter. How did you get into that? Did you go to college for it? What brought you into that world?
I went to college and changed majors about 3 times because I had no idea what I wanted to do. I thought I always wanted to be a lawyer. So each time I changed my major, it was always with the intention to go to law school. Well, my 3rd time changing my major, I changed it to print journalism. I didn't have a single broadcast class because I went to Ole Miss, and back then they didn't combine broadcast and print journalism, which is crazy. Then last semester, senior year, I made the decision like, hey, I love journalism. I'm not going to go to law school. I think I'm going to do this. And I had big dreams of working for a magazine and writing for magazines. Unfortunately, when I graduated college, I realized this is a dying industry and they don't have like steady jobs in that. So that was a rude awakening for me. So I was doing some freelance writing for little local magazines. And one of my stories was about a TV station that was starting up just to like cover local things like meetings and things like that. So when I was doing the research, I found an opening for a TV station and it was for a producer. So you were basically writing the shows. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm sure I can do this, and it's a steady income, so I applied, and that's how I ended up in broadcast journalism.
First question, Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin, is that a 4-letter word in your house?
Oh my gosh, that's like a heartbreak right now. My husband is like a diehard Ole Miss fan as well. He is so into football. Like, he wakes up reading about football, goes to sleep reading about football, and he is crushed. That means we're crushed as well, the rest of the family.
Yeah, and you live now in Louisiana, and him going to LSU has to be especially bitter to some degree.
It's even worse. It's like twisting the knife, you know?
Yeah. So I went to James Madison, and it was like electronic journalism or media. I can't remember exactly what they called it, but I was not a particularly strong writer. So that was like, I can't do writing for a living. And it just seemed like television, I don't say it was easier, but was just more interesting to a degree. And so your first TV station, how big was it? And then walk us through sort of your career. And, I'm really interested in, as a reporter, were you a one-man band? And if so, can you kind of explain what that is and how difficult that is for folks?
Sure, I would love to. So as I mentioned, I started out producing and I did that for a while. And then I realized like, yes, I'm putting together a show, but I'm not actually writing my own stories. And that was the whole thing that I loved about journalism, was writing my own stories. So I kind of learned by myself by like following reporters that were willing to let me go out with them to kind of learn the ins and outs of broadcast journalism, just because that wasn't my background. So I ended up becoming a news reporter, which I wanted to do once I had started in the television station, and quickly decided that really my passion was crime. Not that I want it to happen, but if it was going to happen, I wanted to cover it. And so we didn't really have like a dedicated crime reporter. We still are a small market television station, but we dominated the viewership because when I started, didn't have any television competition down there. I stayed there for just over 7 years, and by the time I left, they did have a competing television station. However, so we were pretty small. We did have a few dedicated people to different things. Sports, for instance, I could never cover sports, just not my thing, right? But we didn't have a dedicated crime reporter. So I kind of made myself that just by always hearing about things, like, you know how it is, meeting people, talking to people, and then people want to talk to you. So when things would happen, I would be called about it. And so that's kind of how I became I guess I called myself the crime reporter there. And as far as one-man bands, oh man, so the industry has been changing so much. And when I started, it seemed so glamorous, right? Like you go out with a photographer and they shoot your video and you're just there writing the stories, doing the interviews, and then they edit it and put it all together. Well, that was not the experience when I was probably mid-career to out. It just started becoming all one-man bands. And when I say one-man bands, I guess for those that aren't familiar with the lingo like we are, it's basically like you go out by yourself. You're carrying the big camera, the big microphone, all the cords, everything. And you are going out there and you're filming your own interviews, your own videos so that you can go back, you edit it all yourself and put it together. And by the way, on a deadline, you don't have like an entire day just to go put this together. And it's so funny because I don't know if you ever did one-man banding, which I did clearly not enjoy. But sometimes you get back to the station and you're transcribing your interviews and you're like, oh my gosh, my person's totally off the camera. I can't use this. This is awful.
So I was at WHSV TV3 in Harrisonburg, Virginia, which was a small ABC affiliate. And I went to James Madison and I was working there during college. Most of the reporters were one-man bands. And then it was like a treat when I would go out and be their videographer and I would do their editing for them because that's really what I enjoyed doing. But it was always funny because sometimes, especially the new reporters would come out and they didn't set their, what was it called when you would set your, first thing you would do is you turn your camera on and then you'd have the white piece of paper and you'd set it to white. I don't remember what that was called, but it was basically the first thing you did to set the camera filter to not make everybody look yellow and whatnot. And then it was half the time people would come back and they'd be out of focus or they would be out of center or they didn't hit record or there was no lighting. And it was just such a crazy time. During that time, this was probably before nonlinear editing. So were you doing like beta? Was it Betamax tapes?
Luckily, I wasn't doing beta tapes. We were doing like editing on computer software at the time, which was also a learning curve for me. It sounds like we would be a good team because the things you like, I don't, and vice versa.
Yeah.
But no, that was like a whole nother thing, was learning the editing system. And I'm sure you can relate, but back in the day, it seems like things are so easy now for everybody in a way, because I used to transcribe every interview pretty much word for word because I wanted to make sure I had everything correct. And nowadays, I know you can just use an app or something to transcribe it for you, but that would take a long time just to do that, just to put your story together, and half of your interview you don't even use.
So I started in 95. Oh, it was called white balancing. All my friends still in the industry be like, oh, come on, dude, you forgot the basics. Well, it's been 27 years. Cut me some slack, Jim Leonard. So it was, you'd have to do the white balancing and all that other stuff. So I started like basically 95 to 98. And that was kind of like that time frame I was way into it. And it was the beta tapes and there was no non-linear editing. That was like late 90s, early 2000s. Man, and sometimes you get bad tape and it was such a crazy thing. And then the other thing about it is I was in a small town, you were in a small town. Talk about like just dealing in that small town mentality. You were a big deal going in and talking to people because we were the only one in Harrisonburg. You were the only one in your town. And so everybody knew and wanted to be on TV. Did you experience that same kind of thing?
Yes and no. I felt like there were some days where I'd go out and everyone wanted to talk to me. And then there were some days where I'm literally begging people, like, I have to have on-camera interviews. Please, you look great. Please just talk to me on camera, because you can't go back without a story. That's not a thing. It's not just one story. You better have a few stories when you head back, and then make one of your stories has to be cut up for 3 different newscasts, and then your other story would just be like a smaller story. But I guess too, like when I was covering crime, it was sometimes harder to get people to talk to me because I'm sure you're aware, but a lot of people in law enforcement don't like to talk to the media, which I get, but it's funny because you and I have both been on both sides. So we see probably the pros and cons more than others do. But then also, when you're trying to get people to talk about things that are very vulnerable on television. It's not always easy. But then obviously I didn't become a crime reporter right away. So I had to cover Mardi Gras parades or the local festival and stuff, which to me was not as much fun. I mean, it's great and it's important, but I really enjoyed the crime reporting. But then everyone wants to talk to you because it's a fun thing. Everyone's having fun. But as you mentioned, like being in a small town, it's funny because I always remember growing up, my dad owned businesses. And so people always said, oh, are you so-and-so's daughter? And I'd be like, yes. And then when I went into the news world, my father said, oh, people keep coming up to me and being like, are you Michelle's dad? And it was just funny how it was such a total reversal and how everyone knows you. And it's weird because you don't know everyone and you're like, oh gosh, am I supposed to know them? Did I talk to them sometime? So it is funny. It was very flattering though when people remembered you and wanted to talk to you, but it just didn't seem like that was supposed to be for me, right? Because I think of that as like famous people on movies and such.
Well, but you were in that town, and we saw the same thing in Harrisonburg. Do you remember what the lead-in to your 6 o'clock newscast was?
Goodness, put me on the spot there. I don't remember what the lead-in to the 6 o'clock news was.
Ours was Andy Griffith.
Really?
Andy Griffith. So yeah. What was the call sign of the call letters of your station?
It was WLOX.
Okay. And what was the town?
It was Biloxi, Mississippi.
Oh yeah. So this sounds crazy, but was that Sinclair?
It was owned by Sinclair at one time. Now they're currently owned by Gray Media, but when I worked there, in the beginning, I can't remember who owned it, but then we were bought out by Raycom. It's funny how the TV world, like they're constantly changing. And you mentioned you were an ABC affiliate. We were as well, and it still is. But during the time when I was there, and I had never heard of this, but it became an ABC and CBS affiliate. So we had news programs on two different major networks.
Oh, wow. I remember your station because my station was owned by the same company, and they would always compare, like we were probably market 211 or something like that, and they would always compare the markets and stuff like that. It was really, really interesting if you've been in that world, which we both have, again, which is fascinating to me because you're the only person I've met who's done it. So how did you go from being a local TV reporter into federal civilian law enforcement?
Yeah, so that's another funny story. It's so funny how things fall into place in your life and you never expect it, right? But as I mentioned, I covered crime. And so I was always going out, interacting with local, state, federal law enforcement, not so much FBI. They didn't like to talk to me. I wonder why. But I did a lot of stories with the DEA and ATF. And it was literally out on a story one day. And it was one of those events that we were there for hours. So we're making small talk. And I always say to the law enforcement guys, or gals, I should say, I would say, hey, let me just see what's going on. I'm not going to report on it. I'm just nosy. I just want to see. And they'd always be like, Michelle, we can't let you over here. You can't see. But they would talk to me. And one of them said, why don't you do what we do? And I was like, you're really funny. I have a degree in journalism. I can't do what you do. And one of the guys, I should give him a shout out, but he may be mad at me for it, so I won't. But he said, that's all you have to have is a degree. And I said, are you serious? And he's like, yeah, that's all you have to have is a college degree and some life experience. And I said, okay. So I went home that evening and within the next few days had applied to 4 different federal agencies because once he told me that, it was game over. Like, I would love to do something like that. I just never knew that I could do something like that. So I applied for NCIS, which at the time, NCIS, the show was huge. So I'm sure they had tons of people applying. So I got a thanks but no thanks right away from them. And I went through the process with ATF, DA, and FBI. And believe it or not, FBI offered first. So that's why I ended up becoming an FBI special agent.
Oh, wow. You didn't apply to the Secret Service?
I didn't apply to the Secret Service. So in Biloxi, Mississippi, I'm sure we have some Secret Service guys, but I never interacted with them. So I didn't know anything anything about the Secret Service at the time. I never had the pleasure of covering any of their stories, so I didn't really know much about them. It's funny, being from small town Mississippi, if someone would have asked me when I was younger, this would have never been what I said I was going to do ever. I would have said, oh yeah, I'm going to be a lawyer. So I just never knew that these opportunities existed or that I could even do it. And so the only reason I even knew to apply to the agencies I did was because I interacted with people in those agencies.
Yeah, makes total sense. I think the only office in the Secret Service in Mississippi is in Jackson.
Okay.
And so a very good office, but just a small group of people. So you go through the process and you show up day one at Quantico in the academy. What kind of background did everybody else have? And was everybody going, how did you get here?
Yes, it's so funny that you say that because, of course, I'm sure it was the same for you, but day one, and almost like any time you meet someone new, we go around the room. What did you do before the Bureau? Where are you from? Things like that. Those were the common questions. Why did you want to join the Bureau? And so everyone goes around, and first day, I'm like, oh gosh, these people are going to not like me or think that I'm not qualified to be here, which I was like, felt lucky to be there in the first place. So it's like they could be right about this. I snuck in here. But yeah, I mean, they had all different backgrounds. We had prior law enforcement, prior military, but then we also had some other ones that like you wouldn't imagine. So I wasn't like the only person that stood out. I know we had a high school band teacher. We had like a wildlife guide. So we had a few different things. So mine definitely stood out as different, but I wasn't the only one that was different, which was pretty surprising and very welcoming to me because sometimes you wonder what people will think, especially when you come from media, because they don't tend to really care for that when you work in law enforcement. So,
well, I think diversity is important in law enforcement as well. If everybody's coming from the same background, at least in federal law enforcement, if they're coming from state and local law enforcement, they're coming from the military, having the diversity, we kind of had the same thing. One guy was a bartender. He went to Harvard, but he was a bartender at the time. We had lawyer. I mean, we had a whole sort of mix of different people, and I think that that's positive because even in the early stages of your career, you can kind of learn more about other sort of ideas and things like that. And I also thought that in many instances, those that came from prior law enforcement struggled more than me. So after TV3, I went to ESPN for about 18 months and I was working there. I never fired a weapon before. I didn't have any preconceived notions of anything. So it was just basically like a clean slate. Whereas some of these guys that had already been in law enforcement already had some bad habits in shooting and sort of already thought that they knew everything when it came to the Constitution and law. And they kind of struggled more than I did because this was all brand new to me. Did you have a similar kind of experience?
Yes. Definitely. Yes. I'm sure you can relate, but in federal law enforcement, there's one way to shoot the gun and it's not the way that all the locals are taught. So yes, like breaking the bad habits. You know, the only time I had really shot a gun before was when I was doing a story and begged the officers to let me shoot with them at the range. So that was my only experience. So you're right. Like it was a clean slate. So definitely. And as you mentioned too, once I became an FBI agent, I really realized how much diversity is so important. But I guess just going into it, I was very naive and was like, oh goodness, like I'm going to stand out because my background's so different. But you're so right. Like the diversity really is amazing. You know, I've met so many amazing people and worked with so many amazing people, but one of my most recent and one of my dear friends was an engineer by trade. And look, when we would do stuff, he would have diagrams and it would go from this to this, and if it happened this way, then it would go down here, and like that is not my world. But that's what made us such a good team, is that the way that he thought and the way that I thought, where I'm like, okay, we got to dumb this down for people like me, right? That's what made us such a good team, was our backgrounds were so completely different. So we had different thoughts. So I definitely agree, but it was just funny going in because I would have had no idea of that until you're immersed in that world.
So when you're in the academy as well, the FBI does it differently than Secret Service. When I came on, I knew what office I was going to. You guys didn't, at least when my wife went through, she didn't know until sometime during the academy. How did that work out for you? What office did you get? And where was it on your list?
Yes, so you're right. We didn't know at the time. It was 12 weeks in. So look, you quit your job, you put everything into this, you're away from your family. So it's like, doesn't matter where you get, like you're going unless you have a backup plan, which I just did not because I put everything into this. So week 12, I'll never forget it. Our group, we were actually the first group of agents and analysts that had trained together for a portion of it. So we have both agents and analysts in our group. We had about, I think, 40 people. And our instructors were like, okay, everyone needs to come up to the front of the room. You're going to say where you want to go, where you think you're going. And then you open up a piece of paper and it tells you where you're going. And I mean, this is life-changing for people, right? Like, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
But in preparation for that, as you mentioned, like you do rank all of the places that you want to go, all the field offices. And I let my husband rank them because I felt like I'm making him move. So I'm going to let him rank them. And he ranked them and he had some really cold places like high up on the list. And I'm like, I lived in Wisconsin for a little bit and Chicago briefly. And it is so cold, like I could not survive. So I moved those places down and I actually moved Washington, D.C. up because we were training at Quantico, Virginia. I'm like, oh, well, it's beautiful here. I hear it gets cold, but not that cold. So it's like, I could do that. And I said, plus everyone wants to go here. There's no way I'm getting DC. So I mean this with all sincerity because I wanted to go there. But most people don't want to go to Jackson, Mississippi or New Orleans or Memphis. And those are our top three. So I get up there very confident that I'm going to get one of those three or somewhere close to home, right? We ranked everywhere in the South first and I get Washington, D.C. And so my husband had that like in the 30s probably. I moved it up to 15, telling him we would not get it. And I also had heard prior to this that sometimes they'll play jokes on people where you open the paper and they say where you go and then at the end they'll tell you that's not where you're going. So it's like, oh, clearly they're playing a joke on me because I'm like the only person in here that wants to go to these other southern places. And it was not a joke. I definitely got Washington, D.C. So I was so worried my husband was going to be like, you're going by yourself because that is so different than where we're from. And he had never moved away from like small town Mississippi. So that's where we got. And honestly, as much as I can joke and laugh about it now, it was such a blessing. And we had such an amazing experience and met some of the most amazing people there. So it was great. It's just not what we expected we were going to get.
Coming from Mississippi to DC, I would imagine, aside from the cost of living, the traffic had to just drive you bananas. I grew up here and I freaking hate it. I can't imagine that. How was that? And then also, what was the first squad you were assigned to?
Sure. So it was definitely a culture shock for us moving there. And I will say we did not live in DC. We lived a ways out. I also let my husband kind of pick where we lived because I wanted him to be comfortable, right? And I felt like he was making such a sacrifice for me to be able to pursue my dream of this career. And so we lived further outside of DC, but oh my goodness, I thought 45 miles outside of DC would be 45 minutes to DC. No, I was wrong.
No way.
So I used to commute like an hour and a half to 2 hours one way, each way, every day for the first several years because I was assigned downtown to our downtown office, Washington field office, and I was assigned to counterintelligence. And counterintelligence was just so foreign to me, literally, that I could not believe I was assigned that because I was hoping to get violent crimes because that's a lot of what I covered before and what made me super interested. And so when I got that, I was like, what are they trying to do to me? Do they not like me? Do they not want me to be here? But no, I mean, it was, again, like something I never knew that I could do or even learn about. It was a whole nother world than I ever knew growing up in South Mississippi. So it was really interesting. And so that was my first squad. I did that for 3 years.
I like how you said that, and it should be the motto of all counterintelligence divisions, which was counterintelligence is foreign to me. Because it's funny, because yes, it is. So how was it going from reporting on cases to working cases? Did you find any sort of corollaries? How quickly did you just fall in love with working cases?
Right away. I started loving it right away for sure, even though when you're in the academy, they're not teaching you a lot about counterintelligence because everything's secret, right? So you have very little training and then you are thrown in. I mean, day one, I had probably like 10 to 12 cases assigned to me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I do? Like, I'm in over my head right now. So I felt like the first few months, I was literally drinking from a fire hose. Like, I'm like, knew nothing. So I worked Russia specifically. I literally knew nothing about Russia. I did ballet when I was younger. I knew they were very good at ballet and many of them liked it. That's it, right? So it was a huge learning curve, but I loved it. It was a challenge and I enjoyed that. You had to dive right in because it was either sink or swim. And the work that I did was just insane. Things that, again, maybe you watch about in a movie and you think there's no way that's real life, but a lot of it is real life. So what an experience it was. And it definitely opened my eyes to a lot of things outside small town that I grew up in.
Is there one case that stood out to you as sort of like the case that set you on this path of just like, I love working cases and this is the one that really sort of lit the match?
I feel like I was so blessed in my career to work so many of those types of cases that it kept keeping me enthusiastic about the job. But I would love to talk about one of my cases that was in counterintelligence that I can actually talk about, which is crazy because usually you can't. But I actually did have one case. So my squad at Washington field office, we are so specialized in what we do, right? And so my squad usually did not do anything that ever went to court. Like, it was just not what we were assigned to do. Well, in the time frame, it was around the 2016 presidential election. And we were seeing a lot of influence from Russia in America, politics, decision making, things like that. So it was a wild time to be working this. We were used to, in the counterintelligence world, seeing, people who come over to the U.S., they're trained intelligence officers. You think about Anna Chapman. She's one of the famous ones from like the 2010 arrests. There were 10 Russian agents that were, in the United States that were arrested. And so that's what traditionally we thought of in counterintelligence world. That's how they operate. Well, after that, they started operating a bit differently. And that's a case that I worked in. It was the first of its kind because they had never used this type of prosecution before in the way that we used it. So I was assigned this case, and because it wasn't what we normally worked, it was so funny because I get called in my supervisor's office, myself and my amazing colleague at the time, Kevin, and we both get called in the office, and my boss is like, okay, I got this assignment from headquarters. I need you to just look at this, but this is not what we do, so just do the logical steps and then get back to your other work. So I'm like, oh, okay, sure. So it was an individual who was in the United States as a student, but there were some things happening that just didn't add up as her only being in the US as a student. And so we started just doing some logical checks and trying to talk to people, and then eventually just tried to reach out to her just to say, hey, can we just sit down and talk to you? Well, usually when you're doing that in the counterintelligence world, the people that we were trying to talk to want to come in because they don't want anything to happen to their visa. Like, they're here in the United States and they want to comply with law enforcement so that they can stay in the United States to do what they're doing. Well, I never got a call back from her. I got a call back from a high-ranking criminal defense attorney. So I'm like, oh my goodness, like, this is not adding up. Like, this is not what we usually see, right? And so things just kind of went from there. But anyways, her name was Maria Butina, and she was a student at the time, but she had really ingratiated herself within the National Rifle Association, the NRA. And at the time, she had predicted, her and government officials within Russia that she were working with had determined that Donald Trump was going to take the presidency. And she had some inroads to people in the highest levels of our government if Trump were to take office, and he eventually did. And she utilized her connections in the US and through the NRA to have sort of like a back channel line of communication. And so she was finding out secret things that you and I didn't even know about before they were to happen, such as like who was going to be appointed certain positions. And then she was sending that information back to Russian officials to see, hey, do we like this person or should we try and push for somebody else? That's how well her scheme worked. But when I mentioned the first of its kind, it's like she was never trained as an intel officer. She wasn't given all the devices and the secret things that they had seen in the other past cases, such as, like I mentioned, they called that case Ghost Stories. So they had all these things that when they were caught, it was pretty obvious that they were Russian intelligence officers. That was not the case here. And she was never formally trained as an intelligence officer. But it was interesting because they utilized her motivations to become big time in the government of Russia to send her over to the US. And she was writing reports as if she was an intelligence officer and sending them back. And so in addition to the thing that I mentioned about trying to have a say in who's picked for certain positions, she was also sending information like reports about different people in politics or that would be influential in the US. She would be sending back if they're married, if they have kids, what they like to do on the weekends, what they like to eat, like really important things for the intelligence community over there, then to be able to try and recruit high-level officials. So it was a very interesting case. She ended up pleading guilty to conspiracy to act as a foreign agent. And that was, as I mentioned, the first time that they had ever charged. It's 951 acting as a foreign agent. First time they charged it for someone that wasn't an actual trained intel officer.
Wow, that's interesting. How did she get her information? Did she develop like a romantic relationship with somebody?
Yes. So it's interesting.
Yeah. It's the easiest way to do it. Yeah.
I know. They always say, right?
Yeah.
Like if this young, attractive woman or man with an accent is talking to you at the bar and you're older, you really need to think those through. And that was definitely how she did it. And it was interesting because while they were pretty certain that it would be Donald Trump who would win the election, she also had a way into the other party had they won the election as well. But they were really banking on one side, but she had both avenues open to her in case it didn't end up that way. That's
interesting. And then during that same time frame, I think you had the stuff with the IRA, the Internet Research Agency. And
yes.
Didn't they charge a bunch of people? And that was probably your squad as well, I would imagine.
It actually wasn't our squad. I believe
It was
actually our cyber squad, cyber counterintelligence squad that did that case. But yes, that came out around that time as well. And then we had, a special counsel at the time, and they were looking into the presidential campaign and any ties that they had to Russia as well. So it was a very interesting time to be working assigned to counterintelligence for sure.
Definitely. How much did it surprise you that whether it's Russia or some of the other nations, both adversarial and maybe not as much, try to influence our elections?
It was wild to me. I feel like I was very naive to the fact that that would be a thing. And the more that I worked it, the more that I understood exactly why that was such a target for them and what kind of damage it could do to the US for sure. But it was never anything that in my days in government in high school that I ever thought about when it came to learning about the elections.
Well, also, I think the internet changed everything because now it's just so much easier to do at scale. And one of the things that frustrates me quite often, honestly, is when I see people that I'm either family or friends with that are clearly just reciting or reposting what is definitely coming from a troll farm controlled by an adversary. And there's no thought process. I mean, the amount of that nonsense that goes on to create divisions in the country is really alarming. And tell me if you think I'm crazy on this, but I always tell people in many instances, the adversary doesn't necessarily look at us as Republicans or Democrats or this or that. We're Americans, and they're trying to create problems in this country to make it harder for us to just have normal lives. And they want sort of bad stuff happening, and people don't see it that way. Are we just being ineffective in communicating it. Where do you see it as like, how can we fix this problem where we're allowing basically outsiders to get in between us as a country, and yet people still seem to be very dismissive of that it's even happening?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will say that whenever we did end up charging the case that I just mentioned and going through the court process, I felt like it was very important because it was a time where counterintelligence, which is always a secret world, was able to be shed light into the public. And so it was very important that we portrayed exactly what happened and why it was so damaging. You mentioned the troll farm and the IRA. That was another opportunity that the world and Americans were able to see what we in federal law enforcement are seeing all the time. But that unfortunately just doesn't happen all the time. A lot of it stays secret. It's our job in federal law enforcement to protect the country from those things. But you're right. We also need to do a better job of educating people on these threats. And you're right about the ways that our foreign adversaries are trying to create chaos within the U.S. And it wasn't just our elections, which is a huge part of America, right? It's like we're a democracy. That is what we are. So targeting the elections is huge. But also in my work, I would see things such as creating discourse by funding certain entities which cause chaos within the US too. And no one would know that, hey, this group, they're from America and they're creating problems. But no one knew that behind the scenes they were being funded by our foreign adversaries. And that is just unbelievable to me because it was never something that I knew, and it's not something that most people know. But I don't know how to do a better job, whether it's coming from the federal law enforcement world or where, educating people about that. It's tough because so much of that is secret. But there are few opportunities, like I mentioned, when there are actual court cases. That is a way to educate the public as much as it is to rid it of the problem, you know.
Yeah, and one of the things that I see is the concerns about how social media has created basically this new world of identity politics where you can't really even have a regular conversation with somebody who is really ingrained in their beliefs, and everything that they see is just reinforcing what they believe. And then when you try to have conversations and say, hey, well, this is kind of messed up, and they'll say, oh, well, what about? So then it's always this whataboutism. Well, what about this guy? He did this. And what about him? Like, can't both sides be wrong? Like, can we not even get to the point where it's like, hey, this is messed up and that is messed up, but at least we can acknowledge that there's a problem on this side, but nobody can even talk like that. Everything operates in a vacuum. Oh, and then it becomes so personal that they won't even see a potential viewpoint that might not align with theirs entirely. And I don't know how to get around that. When I was growing up in the 80s, I never really felt like that. I talk to my friends around the world and they'll say that it's kind of happening globally, but I personally put the responsibility and the blame directly on social media, because what other explanation can you get? And people spend so much time on social media. If I'm an adversary, that's where I'm targeting, because I know I can get stuff to go viral, and I can get these uninformed knuckleheads to send stuff around en masse pretending it to be real. And you just wonder how many times when people are sending this stuff around is, hey, did they do their own research at all to see if this fact about this one person and this crazy thing actually existed? The answer is no. They don't. And it's really infuriating. And I also think, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, unfortunately as well, our former profession hasn't been helpful, and to a large degree in the media. I mean, I worked at ESPN. I was in sports. So I'll just say we collectively, but and it's because news networks that are 24/7 enable people to conflate what's news and what's opinion. And so I have a family member that loved dearly, and she would say, I'm going to go downstairs and watch the news. I'm like, it's 8:00. What news is on? And she's like, Tucker Carlson. I go, it's not the news. It's the furthest thing from the news. The guy admitted he was lying in some lawsuit or something. Like, that's not the news. But it's because it's like Fox News Channel or both sides. But people don't understand what's opinion, and it's because of money, right? I mean, again, say all the time, answer to your question is always money. It's about money. What drives revenue? And what drives revenue is people saying outlandish things to get eyeballs on it. And then the consequence is people don't know what the hell's real and what's opinion anymore. Do you feel the same way?
Absolutely. And I think another part of it is that you were nice enough to say we, but I think you were pointing at me because you did sports. But
No.
in the journalism world, I feel like we used to take our jobs so seriously and be nonpartisan because that is what we are supposed to do. And when I would report a story, I reported facts, and people talking can say what they want, but my job was to say facts, right? And I feel like that's not the world that we live in these days, but a lot of people aren't realizing that media individuals are speaking opinion all the time and they're taking it as fact. I've never been political. I'm not into politics. I don't follow politics. In fact, it's sad to say, because I used to watch the news all the time. I was in news. I was obsessed with news. I really don't watch the news at all because I don't like what is going on in the world today. I said to someone recently, to me, there's right and wrong, not left and right, period. But I agree. I feel like even the people that we're relying on to bring us the news are not just telling facts and letting people decide for themselves anymore. And social media is such a huge thing. And it's the way that a lot of, especially the younger generation, that's their news. That's how they get information on things happening in the world. It's not the television at 6. We used to have 6 a.m., 7 a.m., noon, 5, 6, 10 o'clock newscast. That's it, right? And that's how you got your news. Well, these days, that's not true. It's 24/7, so they have to fill the content, especially because, like you mentioned, it's about money. You want advertisement money. So even if you have nothing to say, you're going to be on TV saying something because that's what pays the bills and the TV station and to keep the lights on there and for people to make money. But I just feel like the industry as a whole is not being true to what journalism actually is supposed to be. These days, anyone is a journalist who wants to be, and it's a shame. And I would say that, since I did and you did work in local television, I would say I did not feel that as much in local TV as I feel it in national TV.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. The other thing, for the 3 years I worked in local TV news, I never even heard a conversation related to politics, like none of that stuff. And I'm like you, I'm very anti-politics in the sense of I hate both sides equally. So no, and I like to stir the pot with my friends anyway. So I'll take the contrarian viewpoint because I don't really care. I don't. Being in the Secret Service, I intentionally never became political because that's not my job, and it's just not, quite honestly, interesting to me. I don't really get worked up. A lot of it is what people talk about politically. These are all red herrings that really don't affect you. Like whether it's just name the topic, gender bathrooms and stuff like that. I don't give a shit about that at all. Or men and women's sports. I don't care about that. I care about are we safe? Is the economy going well? Is my family that's it. None of that stuff matters. But I also think the problem that I see as well is the race to be first is more important than the race to be right. And I see that all of the time. And so when I was with the service and now in the 2 years I've been gone, I have a lot of friends in media that do it right, that are really good writers, and they're long form. And I love those guys. They really do great work. But the ones that are like the race to be first, most often they're not checking two sources. They're not doing any of that stuff. And then even in sports, it always makes me laugh because it'll all be like, so-and-so is down for the year as first reported by so-and-so. It's like, who gives a shit who the first to report it was? But in that world, and if you don't say, as reported by Adam Schefter, blah, 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 then they get all worked up. And then it just becomes about them. And it's so silly because at the end, I don't care. The guy's out for the year with the ACL tear. Okay, I don't care who's the first guy to report it. But in their world it is, which creates problems. And that's just silly sports. But even in news, it's the same thing. It's this race. The journalistic integrity has been compromised in many instances because of that. And it's because of the speed in which news happens, to your point. When I was at TV3, it was like a 6 o'clock at noon o'clock, at noon, public school education, at noon, and 6 o'clock, and then 11 o'clock. And that was the news. But even like in the 90s and 80s, it was like Peter Jennings and Tom Brokaw and Dan Rather.
Yeah.
And that's where people got their news. And I'm not saying that was great, but it certainly didn't flood you with stuff. And I'm sure we're around the same age. Headline news, when that came out, that was a little different because it was 24/7, but it was kind of the same over and over again. And now with social media, and to your point, I think it is good that when you said everyone's a journalist, that's kind of like a double-edged sword, because I think it's good and bad, because people can post stuff and you can see with your own eyes if you want to use them. The information is now out there for us more than ever before if you're willing to actually have your own critical thinking and reasoning. It seems like far too often people want to just be spoon-fed and not actually do that critical thinking. I mean, to the beginning of the conversation, print being sort of a dying media, do you think that that's because of the way that they're ingesting news is why it's just very dismissive, and because you're only getting it in 20-second increments?
Maybe. And when I was mentioning print journalism, I was more specifically speaking of magazine journalism, because that's what I wanted to go into. But I do agree, like, people aren't paying for newspapers. They're going online, which does create an opportunity for print journalists to write long form online as well. But definitely agreed too with the fact that people aren't checking things. And you think of the world in AI, I can take a video of something and post it online, but how do you know that that video wasn't altered in any way? You don't. So even that creates misinformation to the world. And you were mentioning sports, but like, I even think about the other day, because even though I don't really watch the news, like, I do follow big events and I still get breaking news alerts because I do like to know what's going on in the world. I just can't watch everything about politics. But I think about the awful situation in DC where those two young National Guardsmen were shot. And right away it was saying that they were dead. And that is awful, because they weren't. And that's a big deal. That's impactful. We have families, friends watching this news, hearing that, and it's not even true. And that, to me, is a big deal. You're right. Like, it's not about being first. It's about being right. And it doesn't matter if it takes time to get multiple sources to tell you what happened. It's worth it, because that is impacting people's lives. And that, to me, is so important. And that's something that happened recently that it makes me think about. And it's not even about politics. It's about a very serious situation where two heroes were shot doing their job. So that just bothers me, like you were saying about being the first instead of being the correct reporting.
Well, and I'm sure you saw it in your career as well. When some critical incident happens, there's always a press conference. And the media is asking a lot of questions that law enforcement doesn't know the answers to yet, but they don't want that to be the answer. And so sometimes I feel like when I see press conferences, we rushed the press conference to get in front. But how many times did you see an incident happen that the first reporting turned out not to be anywhere close to what actually happened?
A lot. You bring up a point. For about a year and a half, I helped out with public affairs as well for the FBI. And so I was helping organize press conferences and putting together what our executives were going to say about situations. And I remember one incident happened and my head boss said, "Hey, Michelle, we're going to do a press conference." I was like, "Great. When are we going to go out there?" And he said, "I have to leave right now." And I said, "Yes, sir. I'm going to stay back. I'm going to put some talking points together and I'm going to meet you there and give them to you before you go on." We did fine and we got it together, but everything is in such a rush to get out there versus to take time to digest what just happened to make sure that we have the facts right. And I always stress the importance to people that we're going to do press conferences on behalf of federal law enforcement. We have to have the public's trust and for them to believe what we are saying, because that is what everything we do is based on. And so I would just say, hey, if they ask you certain questions that we don't know the answer to, we don't know the answer at this time. We just got out here on the scene. We're going to be working for as long as it takes, and we're going to get to the bottom of everything. And as soon as we're able to tell you, we will. And that's an okay answer. We don't have to answer every question that comes at us if we're not prepared to. but it's not always the answer that the reporters want to hear, unfortunately.
And then also in law enforcement too, we think about, these critical incidents. We're not trained to go in front of 50 pieces, media, and get thrown questions. Like, that's not what we do. And so I have a lot of empathy for these guys that get thrown up there and with maybe a week-long training at most, but in many instances not. And that's not something that you can be proficient at unless you've done it a lot of times. So how many times have you seen press conferences where you kind of like, man, I feel bad for that person because they were just not ready to handle, like, I think we, in many instances, put them in a bad position because of, oh, well, this guy's the head of this office, so let's throw him out there. It's like, well, did you give him any tools and training in order to make sure that this doesn't blow back on us?
Exactly. No, you hit it right on, because you and I are different, but a lot of people that join law enforcement have never been in this world, right? And they are being thrown out there right after something happens and expected to be able to deliver a message in the best way possible, especially in such awful circumstances many times. And as I mentioned earlier, I had one interview in my career with FBI because it was hard to get them to speak, which I understand why. But now the FBI is very out there and they're wanting to be as transparent as possible, which I think was always the case. It was just that we let court documents speak for themselves first. But it has really changed over the years. And you're right, like, people that have never had any training are now being expected to be in front of the camera, which is not comfortable for everyone. It just isn't. And then to be able to not only deliver a message in sometimes awful circumstances, but then also take a ton of questions from the media. And so I will say, as far as the FBI headquarters level was doing more and more training for executives to get them prepared, which is so important because we want to set people up for success. And if we want people to have trust in us, we also have to be confident when we're going out there. And you think about local as well. It's not if something happens, it's when it happens these days, unfortunately. You always have to be prepared for every situation. We are normally the ones to rush in and help, but now we're also being expected to be the ones in front of the camera and talking about it, which is not easy.
Yeah, the other thing too is that I'm sure it's the same with the Bureau as it was with my agency is day one, never talk to the media, never trust the media. That is ingrained in you from the second. And part of that for my former agency was because of the protection. You don't want to say anything. The media is always around. But that was what was ingrained in you from the moment you started. So then to say, all right, for 20 years, it was don't trust, never talk to. And now all of a sudden, now you're engaging. That's a huge pivot that I think really makes it more difficult. And part of it is because people have been screwed in the past before by saying something off the record, and then next thing you know, it's public. So it's a really difficult challenge, I think, now more than ever before. So anyway, well, Michelle, I really appreciate your time. It was wonderful talking to you. Best of luck down in Louisiana dealing with Lane Kiffin and how that season's going to go. And thank you. I really, really enjoyed it. And it's a pleasure talking to somebody with the same sort of unique background that I had growing up.
Thank you, Matt, for the opportunity. I really enjoy speaking with you and talking about the thing that we have in common that not many of us do in federal law enforcement. So this has been really fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to the listeners for listening to this episode of Detonation Point presented by Elastio. We will see you next week. Thank you.